there is this idea that we need to eliminate our stress, that stress is, harmful to our bodies. And I think it's really important to remember that we are made to manage stress. We are made to experience stress, and that stress is not bad. If you think about the things that bring you into a more activated state, if you were to gauge like where my cortisol level is, which is a measure of stress, it might be elevated. Is this podcast recording an inherently bad thing? No, not at all. Like, we're having a great time. There are a lot of places in our lives where we are experiencing a state of activation that is not inherently a bad stress. We have to remember that stress is not bad. We're meant to deal with stress. It's just that most people are managing too much stress.
Hey y'all, welcome back to Hopeful and Wholesome. And today I'm excited to welcome on my friend Rachel Mark. She is a registered acupuncturist and integrative health coach living in Victoria, British Columbia. She's the co-owner of Glow Integrative Clinic, a multidisciplinary health clinic in Victoria that focuses on supporting women's health across the lifespan. She has a keen interest in the human body, how it works, and the incredible interconnectedness and its ability to heal. Across multiple school programs and almost 20 years of education, the missing pieces of the healing language remained, and she has dedicated her career to weaving those missing pieces together and spends her days working with people of all ages and backgrounds to optimize health and integrate a whole person approach to healing. And today we're talking about stress and nervous system dysregulation and specifically how it impacts women. This is a different conversation than just we know stress affects our nervous system, because this is specifically about women's health and hormones. And we're going to clear up a lot of the myths and misconceptions about stress itself. And Rachel has a lot of really what you might find controversial things to say about stress and what we thought we knew about stress. This is really an informative conversation and with a lot of really great information for you as a woman as we age. So let's jump in. Okay, y'all, I'm here with Rachel, and I'm super excited to have you on the show today, Rachel. Thanks for hanging out with us.
Thanks so much for having me.
I'm super excited. And we connected just on our aligned all the things, modalities that we do. And so we're aligned on so many things. And I would love for you to just give us kind of your how I got here story, because I always love hearing those, because you tie so many different modalities together, kind of like I do, not the same ones, but you have kind of this mixed bag of things that you help women or with how you help women. So can you tell us how you got into this field and how you kind of built this little toolbox that you have of all the things you use to help women?
Yeah, for sure. I think as someone who is a lifelong learner, it's sort of that thing that as one door opens, you realize how many other doors there are, and you just keep opening doors. And it ends up with a lot of education and different tools, as you said. For me, it really started as a young teenager. I was a ballet dancer growing up, and I had a lot of different injuries throughout the years. And my parents were really open to other forms of healing and acupuncture specifically. And my dad had had an experience where he had thrown his back out and was on bed rest, and someone said, maybe try an acupuncturist. And so he went and saw this acupuncturist. And I remember so clearly watching him like hobble up the stairs to get into this appointment. I was in the car with my mom, and then came like bounding down the stairs an hour later. And I was like, okay, whatever that is, I want to know more. And that was as, a pretty young youth. And so when I was injured as a dancer, I always said, I want to go to this acupuncturist. Like, the experience I had seen was just so amazing. And so I had these great experiences, and he helped me a lot in terms of injuries. And then I was in a really serious car accident and helped me through that, and just sort of was always this guide. And I never really understood what was going on, what he was doing, but I was just always interested in it. Sort of planted that seed for me that would come to fruition many, many years later. And so after that car accident, my career as a ballet dancer was no longer viable. And because I had always been interested in the body and anatomy and how it all worked together, it was a really clear transition for me to study kinesiology, which is the study of exercise science, movement, and how we can support people with exercise and physical activity. And so I always say my undergrad in kin was sort of the understanding of the body. I came out of that degree, I think like many young, chipper practitioners do, kind of saying like, I've done my exams, I know what to do, I can make you the best exercise prescription, we're going to get you so healthy and strong and da-da-da. And what I learned very quickly, as many of us do in the helping professions, is that there's so much more to healing and health than the textbook physiology. We have to create relationships. We have to understand how people's psychology and motivation really work, especially when it comes to changing health behaviors. And so that led me to do my master's in health behavior change and health psychology. So basically understanding why people do what they do and how we can support them to make healthful changes in their behavior. And so that was sort of the mind part that came after the body. And so I had these two pieces integrated. And again, I was sort of like, okay, I'm ready now. I can go and do this. And then I realized that there was another missing piece. There was this sort of way that all of these different areas of our bodies, of our minds, of our whole beings, there's the whole interconnection of it that I felt was missing. And it led me to really give some thought to how would I go about basically acquiring the language to support people in that. And I came back to that seed that was planted, many, many years before with that acupuncturist. And I said, that feels like that web that connects it all together for me. And so I went to school and became an acupuncturist, and now have really focused my practice on nervous system health and women's hormone health and the interconnection between those two systems in our bodies, using all of those different kind of chapters of learning along the way.
Thank you for sharing your story. And it is, I love the layered. I mean, it's similar to my story. Like there's always layers, and then you find out there's more and there's more, and all the different ways that it all works together. And I love that you tie in the nervous system and women's hormones, because I think, I say this, so maybe it's just the bubble I live in, but I feel like we hear a lot about the nervous system. We hear a lot about women's hormones, but we don't always hear about the connection between the two, or at least not in the depth that it actually exists. Like I think we're familiar with cortisol, like, oh, it's the stress hormone. And we're like, oh, be careful with your cortisol levels. But I feel like sometimes that's kind of where it stops. So can you give us some depth on how these two things, the nervous system and your hormones, women's hormones specifically, are related, connected?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, a lot of that thinking around like your nervous system is one thing and your hormone health is another thing. And, in your work, like your digestive system is another thing. And like all of these different systems in our bodies, we grow up with a Western medical model, which, there's so many strengths in that, which basically divide our body into systems, and people become experts in those systems. And it's great because when you have an issue with one of those systems and you go to a specialist, they know all the things to know about that system. But sometimes it's looking at it in isolation. So I think our nervous system is really, I always think of it as the web of connection. It's like the communication highway through our entire body. And so it really is that web that connects everything together. So that's our metabolic health, our hormone health, our digestive health, our cognitive health. Everything is affected by the functioning essentially within our nervous system. And when we're talking about nervous system health from a day-to-day basis, like when you're talking about cortisol, we're really talking about one division of our nervous system, which is our autonomic nervous system. And the autonomic nervous system was designed as a survival response for us as human beings. So people are likely familiar, have heard these terms of our fight or flight system or our rest and digest system. And those are the two primary divisions within our autonomic nervous system. And the autonomic nervous system is everything in the body that happens automatically. It's exactly like what the name implies. So it's our hearts beating, our lungs breathing, where blood is moving through our bodies, our pupils, are they dilating or constricting? Is our digestive system turned on, or is that more of a back burner function at the moment? Our immune system, so many different things that the autonomic nervous system controls. And the way that this links to hormone health is that with our sympathetic nervous system, that fight or flight system being our stress response and being our survival response, our brains, when we go into that state, are going to prioritize survival over everything else. And this is because our brains really, this part of our brain at least, has not really evolved in thousands of years. So our brains still think that the stressors, that when we become stressed, when we become activated in that system, that it's the same as like being chased by a lion in the woods, which is always, the example that's given in the textbooks and all of that, because it's just so easy to relate to like what you would do in that situation, right? You would get all puffy and get ready to fight, or you would run like heck to get out of there, or you would freeze and play dead. But ultimately your body will adjust its functioning to try to survive that lion. And because our brains don't know any better, modern day stress is creating those same physiological responses as being chased by a lion in the woods. The issue is that we are not being chased by lions in the woods for the most part. We are being inundated with to-do lists. We get notifications on all of our different devices 24 hours a day. We have multiple roles and responsibilities, especially for women, that we are carrying. So that may be running a business, being a mom, taking care of kids, being a partner, a spouse, taking care of aging parents, financial concerns. There are so many different stressors that are not as large for the most part as being chased by a lion in the woods, but they're small and they stack up and they're relentless. And so when our bodies go into that state of fight or flight, and many of us are living more in that state, our body has to make compensations. And if you think about it on the most kind of basic sense, if you're being chased by a lion in the woods, it's probably not a great idea to get pregnant at that point. Right? And when we think about female hormone health, particularly estrogen and progesterone, but you could throw in thyroid hormones, throw in testosterone in there. When you think about those, while they perform many, many functions in the body, a primary driver of their existence is for a menstrual cycle, which ultimately serves the purpose of fertility. And so if cortisol is running the show because we are stressed by, life as it is, our body will start to make compensations because it starts to think, okay, maybe now's not a great time to conceive and bring a baby into this world, this stressful world being chased by a lion.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And I think hearing that, it's always, I like that you brought in that metaphor, which I feel like we've probably heard 100 times, but I think sometimes we overlook what it really means about how our body is affected by our nervous system and us being in that perpetual state of fight or flight. And that I just feel like that imagery is always necessary for us to really feel in our bodies, like, oh, this is why, like, I don't know why my period's all over the place. Oh, I don't know why, like you mentioned the fertility thing. I don't know why my gut's a mess. Okay, like this isn't a priority for your body. When we're talking about hormones, specifically, I would love for you to dive in specifically to things like estrogen and progesterone. We have it's all women listening to this, but there's a lot of women that are heading into perimenopause. They're already into perimenopause. Maybe they're on the other side. And estrogen, progesterone, of course, we have other hormones in our body, but these are the things that we focus on the most. So can you give us a look at what's happening to our estrogen and progesterone when our nervous system is all out of whack? And how do we reconcile? Like, how do we balance these things out?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you think about hormones, these hormones being produced, they are produced in different areas of the body, but they're also produced by our adrenal glands, which produces cortisol. And all of these hormones have the same chemical backbone, which is cholesterol. And so our body can only produce so much cholesterol. We can only bring in so much cholesterol. And so our bodies have to decide what to do with this. And it will always prioritize those ingredients going primarily to cortisol if there's a need for that. So when we look at sort of the hormone creation pathway, if you will, there's a number of different steps that these hormones go through in order to be produced. And when we're feeling really stressed, when we are experiencing that for longer periods of time, usually the first hormone to get thrown off is progesterone. And progesterone is the hormone that is it kind of takes the lead role in the second half of the menstrual cycle. And it's really about us being calmer, more grounded. It helps our mood stabilize. It helps us sleep. And progesterone is driven primarily from a healthy ovulation. So once we ovulate, what's left of the follicle there starts producing progesterone, and then our adrenal glands produce progesterone as well. And so usually the first thing that we start to see is that our moods start to change a little bit, particularly in that luteal phase. So the second half of your cycle, maybe that like week leading up to your period, maybe you're more irritable, you might be more emotional. So you cry at, the drop of a dime kind of thing when you're like, I don't know why I'm crying. You're not sleeping as well. And you might feel more anxious, more overwhelmed. The key way that I start to identify this when I'm working with people is they say like, I don't know why I felt anxious about that. Like, it's not like it was a big deal, right? So they can recognize in their minds that their bodies are acting in a way that doesn't really make sense. And that typically is the first thing that we start to see shifting, is that drop in progesterone because resources are being diverted towards cortisol. What that starts to do is create a larger discrepancy in the relationship between estrogen and progesterone. So we're never meant to have the same, if we did like a blood draw, we're never meant to have the same amount of estrogen and progesterone. They're not meant to be on equal ground. And across a menstrual cycle, they each have their own natural ebb and flow. And what becomes really important between the two of them is the relationship. So, are they basically keeping each other in balance across that cycle? And so if we start to see this drop in progesterone, it starts to create what we will often refer to as an estrogen dominant pattern. So estrogen is always really going to be higher in amounts than progesterone. That's normal. We want that. But what happens is that as progesterone starts to drop, the discrepancy between the two increases. And so we see this pattern of symptoms that suggests high levels of estrogen. And that can be things like breast tenderness and distension, fibrocystic breasts, can be shortened cycles. It can be things like the development of fibroids or endometriosis, heavier periods. So we can start to see those sorts of shifts that take place. And over time, that relationship, if we aren't making any adjustments, can start to create some quite significant longer term changes.
Yes, that makes sense. And thank you for walking us through that. I don't think we can't hear that enough, just understanding how our bodies actually work, since these are things that we weren't really taught. And I want to look at how you're bringing acupuncture into this specifically. We haven't really talked that much about acupuncture on the show. And I like that this was kind of one of the final puzzle pieces you put together with how you're helping people and how you're helping women. It's like this kind of ties it all together. So when we're talking about the nervous system and we're talking about hormones, how does acupuncture kind of bridge those two and support us in those areas?
Mm-hmm. Well, acupuncture is a modality that is known as an energetic form of medicine, right? So it's a more encompassing form of medicine in terms of looking at how the body functions, in terms of looking at our organ systems, our emotions, our relationships, the different tissues in our bodies, what's happening outside in the weather, the energetics of food, things we're putting into our body. It takes into consideration how all of these things kind of interact for our body to function in harmony or balance. And acupuncture, it's considered this energetic form of medicine. We talk about energy being called qi, which is like this flow of energy. And I always encourage people to think about it from the sense of everything is energy, right? So you can think about Western physiology and blood cells and your mitochondria in your cells and all those things. And that's energy. That is simply the movement of atoms through our bodies. And so energy from a qi or traditional Chinese medicine perspective is just putting a different word to it. And so in the same way that we want to create balance and harmony in our body from a Western physiological lens, from a traditional Chinese medicine, a TCM lens, we're looking at it in terms of energy is flowing through our bodies in different ways. And there can be imbalances that start to be created. So that can be that energy is stagnated. It's not moving smoothly. And in that case, we may experience pain, discomfort. We may experience the development of growths, like thinking about fibroids. We may experience emotional changes as a result of stagnation. So that could be things like frustration, anger. We notice we're sighing a lot more. And these are things that our bodies do when there's sort of that stagnation, that like clumping up almost of energy. Energy can also move slowly. It can be heavy. It can be, if our bodies run really hot, then things are moving really quickly, and that can create other changes and symptoms as well. And so when we look at how the nervous system is functioning, how our hormone health is functioning from a Chinese medicine lens, we're really looking at the patterns within the person. So we ask a lot of questions around all different systems in the body to try to piece together patterns that are happening. And when we do that, then we're able to recognize where is this imbalance happening, and then how we treat that, how we sort of smooth that out becomes really clear. So one of the biggest ways that acupuncture can be supportive for people is that shift into a parasympathetic state. So there is the ability during an acupuncture session for your body to move into a parasympathetic rest and digest state. Many people will fall asleep. It's also that place when you're meditating where it's like, you're awake, but it feels like you're asleep. It kind of that like limbo zone. A lot of people go into a state like that. And so it can be deeply restorative for your nervous system, in addition to some of the underlying imbalances that we might be working
that makes
on
sense.
correcting.
When we're looking at the nervous system, and I feel like I said this a little bit before, but I feel like there's kind of this buzz, like it's kind of a buzzword now. We talk about nervous system regulation and regulate your nervous system. And I just feel like it's everywhere now. And I have mixed feelings about that because yes, of course, we know it's important, right? We know it's important to regulate our nervous system, but I find that there's just a lot of, I guess, misinformation is the word that I want to use. Like people just aren't teaching it in the best way, maybe not correct. And there's just a lot of things they talk about that just aren't really true about how our nervous system works. I would love to hear from you. What do you find are some of the biggest misconceptions or myths or even just misinformation out there about our nervous system and how our nervous system is designed to operate and how we can regulate?
Yeah, such a great question. So I'd say that there's probably three main misconceptions that I see all over the internet, I hear about a lot. And one being that stress is bad. And that there is this idea that we need to eliminate our stress, that stress is, harmful to our bodies. And I think it's really important to remember that we are made to manage stress. We are made to experience stress, and that stress is not bad. If you think about the things that bring you into a more activated state, sometimes I like to use that word activated versus stress, because, even thinking about this conversation that we're having right now, I don't feel overly stressed by any means. I'm not, feeling my heart racing or anything like that, but I'm certainly engaged in talking to you. I'm alert, I'm thinking, I'm very present. And so if you were to gauge like where my cortisol level is, which is a measure of stress, it might be elevated, right? Is this podcast recording an inherently bad thing? No, not at all. Like, we're having a great time, right? So there are a lot of places in our lives where we are experiencing a state of activation that is not inherently a bad stress. Think about a deadline, working on a project that, it's a lot of work, but you're really excited about. And then of course there are stressors that are more on that negative frame. So we have to remember that stress is not bad. We're meant to deal with stress. It's just that most people are managing too much stress.
Yeah, that's a good one.
So I think that's the first one. The second is that cortisol is bad, which is sort of an offshoot of that first one. We hear everywhere about, we have to decrease cortisol. We have to do a cortisol detox. We have to all these things. And cortisol is another thing that our bodies naturally produce cortisol. If we don't produce cortisol, we will die. It's a life-threatening condition that does exist. And people who have that condition need to supplement daily with cortisol so that they can survive, because cortisol plays a very important role in our health of governing our sleep-wake cycle in relationship with melatonin. And cortisol gives us the energy mobilization, the kick to get out of bed in the morning, the energy to sustain our day, and plays an incredibly important role in how so many of our systems within our body function. So cortisol is not bad. And again, we want to make sure that we are regulating the natural cycle of cortisol rather than letting it fly super high all day long and into the night.
That's a good one. Do you have any other ones?
Yeah. And then I'd say number 3 is that the goal of a healthy nervous system is to
I'm glad you brought that one in.
All the time. Yeah. I hear that a lot from people of like, I just want to feel calm. And I think part of that is because, again, we're spending so much of our time, with our foot jammed on the gas pedal, so to speak, feeling like we're go, 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 go. And so the opposite of that feeling of overactivation and high stress is to be calm. And so there's this desire to move in that direction of what we don't have and we're not experiencing. However, if you felt calm all the time, life would be pretty boring. So we do want to make sure that we're falling into that goal of a healthy nervous system, which is not to feel calm all the time, but it's to have flexibility. The goal of a healthy nervous system is to be able to move between states of activation and states of rest and relaxation in a more seamless way. It's to be able to experience something that makes us really angry and allow that emotion to process and then be able to move away from it, right? So that more easul dance within our nervous system is really the goal, not to be
that's a big one. That's one of the ones that drives me crazy because I also think that's like, it's putting well, it's setting really unrealistic expectations for your existence. Cause like you were saying, you're like, life is gonna life. We're gonna get stressed. So like that doesn't even make sense. And then two, I think it's like a really good recipe for like emotional suppression or spiritual bypassing or those kind of things where we're just kind of shoving it all down and not dealing with things. And then we all know like lots of things can happen from there. So I think that one is one that one really gets me fired up. Ending this is such a good conversation and I think it's so necessary. What tools, strategies, like what are your kind of go-tos for the women listening who are ready to like really hone in on this whole nervous system hormone connection piece we're talking about? What are your best strategies or tools or to help us with managing our nervous system?
Yeah, I think it really comes back to looking to the foundations of our health. And so that includes things like, how are we nourishing ourselves? Like, what are we eating? What are we drinking? What are we putting into our bodies? What are we putting onto our bodies? Because these can all play a really important role. The food that you bring into your system, the vitamins and minerals and all the components of that help support your nervous system function, right? So that's really important. And in addition to that, it's like, how are you eating? Like, are you eating rushed in the car on the way to an appointment? Or are you able to sit down and have a few breaths before you eat, that's one tool. That's an amazing thing that you can do before you eat to support your nervous system function and just gently shift into that rest and digest state. Another is like, how are you moving your body, right? So the foundations of physical activity and exercise are really, really important. And that can look really different depending on what's going on in your system for you right now. And so it's really not a one size fits all. And that's really how I work with people a lot, is that personalization of what these foundations look like. How are you building resilience in your nervous system? So to me, that often for a lot of busy women out there, that's those micro moments. So whether it's those 5 breaths before you eat, maybe you are driving to an appointment and you get there and before you go in, you sit in the car, you close your eyes, you take a few deep breaths, or you kind of like shake your hands out if you're feeling more anxious. And these are like those micro moments that I'm not asking you to meditate for 45 minutes every day. It's like, how do we find 30 seconds? How do we find 2 minutes here and there so that we can just start to allow some of that pressure in your system to be let off? So we've got nervous system resilience. We've got sleep. Sleep is one of the most foundational aspects to our health, which I recognize that when our nervous system is out of balance, when our hormones are off balance, it can create a lot of challenge for sleep. And so that's also where we really need to start to look at, like, what are those additional tools? Acupuncture is a great tool to support with sleep. Are you doing an evening wind down of any type, right? So a lot of people, it's like, go, 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 crash. And then you get into bed and your brain is like buzzing and your body's exhausted and you're like, I can't fall asleep. So like, how are we winding down at the end of the night? There's so much that we can do just to support sleep. And then I think the last piece is like, how are we connecting with other people? How are we finding joy? How are we doing things that feel in alignment for our values and our goals and who we are as people? Because when we feel like we're kind of living every day as a grind, that's really challenging. And there's no amount of like exercise or nutrition support that will help you with that, right? Like, finding that alignment is really important, or recognizing that the situation that you might be in is a phase, it's a season. And so how do we switch our mindset around what we're experiencing in that moment? Like, for those out there with young kids, it's like that could be really challenging, and like maybe you're not sleeping as well, but this is not forever. And so how do we put the supports in place, but how do we also recognize like, this is a stage of life?
That's a really good perspective. Yes, those are great tools. And as I feel like I say this so often on the show, none of this is fancy. Like none of this is complicated. None of this is like, it's all, like you said, it's like the foundations, it's the basics, going back to the basics. And I think we try to like overdo it or like sexify it all, where it's like, it doesn't have to be the sexy thing you think it should be. It could just be, these are all so simple. And while simple, it doesn't necessarily mean they're
Yeah.
easy, because it does require like intention, and it requires you to like put effort into it and presence and all those things, which aren't always easy. But I love that you just outlined such simple things that we think like, oh, okay, ho hum. And it's like so elementary, but it's really not. Like those are the things that make the biggest difference. So I love everything you shared in that list.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that this is such a tangible episode too. Like you gave so many things for us to work with and gave the women the things that they need to take with them. And I do have one more question that I want to ask you that I ask everybody. But before I do, can you let everybody know where they can find out more about you? Because I mean, and I will just tell you, Rachel's page is just a plethora of things to help you support your nervous system and your hormones and all the things. So all the places where they can find out about you and working with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can go to my website, which is rachelmark.ca. You can find me on Instagram at rachelmark.ca. And those are the main places where you are going to get a lot of resources, a lot of information. I work with women in person in clinic here in Victoria in Canada. And I also work virtually with women in a health coaching capacity in a one-on-one fashion. So if that's something that you're interested in, we can definitely chat about that. I think, as you said, like all of these pieces they're simple and they're not easy. And the reason that we pass over so many of these foundations is because they require the day in, day out consistency, which is just harder than taking a pill or doing this procedure or seeing this person. We actually have to do the work. And so that personalization is what we do together.
So true. Okay, the last question I want to ask you, what do you think is the most important thing you can do to live with purpose?
I think the first thing is to start to recognize what actually makes you happy. You know, it's something I talk to my clients a lot about, because in a world where there are so many sources of information and so many ideas about what we quote unquote should be doing, we can really get into these patterns of, oh, well, this person on the internet is so happy doing this, and so I would be so happy doing this. But you might not at all. And so I really encourage people to start to think about, and I do this, definitely around like New Year's. My birthday is at the beginning of September. So I always think of September as like a new year, because it's like the school year and all of that, versus January. But it's a practice that I do of like, I like to kind of close my eyes and think back to the last time that I felt like just truly happy, in flow, easeful. Sometimes it was like this morning, and other times I'm like, oh yeah, it's like it's been a while, and to start to think about what that was. Where were you? If you were like on a beach in Hawaii on vacation with your family, it's like, okay, then maybe we're not going to Hawaii all the time, but how can we bring elements of that into your day-to-day life, right? And so start to think about that and then bring that in and start to play with it.
I love that. That's such a good practice. And I feel like that's also very supportive for your nervous system. So I love that. It's like a 2-for-1. Yeah, I love it.
Totally.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Rachel. And thank you for spending your time with us today. This is, like I said, so many tangible things that women can take away from. And I think this is so crucial for us and our hormone health and just overall health. So thank you for sharing all of this wonderful insight.
Well, thanks so much for having me. So much fun.